So yes, the first thing we're going to look at today is reducing your word count. So yes, chances are you've finished off, you've got a huge amount written down and you've gone over the word count. That's one way of having written too much. It might also be that while it's technically within the word count, it just reads too long. It feels ponderous, over-exampled, it's kind of heavy and dense, and you just don't feel like it's kind of sharp and snappy and keeping to the argument. So there are kind of two ways that you can have written too much. And that's quite often because we use writing as a form of thinking. If you've been to any of Alberto's workshops, you'll be familiar with this idea of like just getting it down on paper, this kind of free writing, using it as a way of working through what it is you want to say. And that's brilliant. And that's definitely what we would recommend, more than trying to polish it in your mind and just put down exactly the right set of words. But because we've used it as a form of thinking, it's quite natural, therefore, that you need to go through and revise it. So this isn't a failing of yours that you've written too much. It's a completely natural part of the writing process. So one way that we can think about reducing our word count is when we're reading back through the material that we've written is to ensure that we're staying critical, to make sure that we eliminate anything that is purely descriptive. It will vary, obviously, from discipline to discipline, but in the main, if you feel that something is just a bit too puffy, there are just too many words in there, reread it with this in mind, thinking, is this descriptive? And there's a nice little table on the slide here for what you might do in those cases. Or are you being critical? Are you being analytical? And this is one of the easiest ways sometimes to just take out quite significant chunks of work where you feel you've just gone into too much detail describing what happened. This might be kind of historical context. It might be descriptions around your field work. It might be kind of biographical information, but just stuff that doesn't really move your argument forward. So bearing that in mind is quite an easy way sometimes just to go through and eliminate sentences, large chunks, maybe even whole paragraphs that aren't really being analytical. And that's one of the benefits here of us sharing these slides. You can look through that table in a little bit more detail. So that might just be as you go through, just reading things in that way. Another way to really hone down, if you've got thousands and thousands of words you need to get rid of, is to reverse outline your document. And what do we mean by this? So rather than when you're planning, putting a series of bullet points, this is what I'm going to write in my chapter, put all that to one side and just use the text that you've got in front of you to reverse outline. So what am I saying here? What is the chapter heading? What are my main sections? What are the points within those sections? That allows you to kind of strip out all the words, all the stuff that you feel you've really crafted and poured your heart into. It makes it a very kind of clinical process, but it is actually really useful for being able to see whether or not your ideas are developing in a logical sense, whether or not you're staying focused. Are there kind of large digressions that aren't adhering to the question? And at that point, you can think, this doesn't really move my argument on. I can get rid of this section. Or you might see sections coming up over and over again and thinking, maybe I can merge them and I can cut out some words there. Or do I really need to mention it in that chapter as well as that chapter? So beginning to see that outline without the sort of, there's something very emotive, isn't there, about writing, something that you've crafted, something you've spent hours on. You might have, angst over, hours and hours on one or two particular sentences, and therefore you feel you can't cut them. But if you're not looking at those words, if you're just looking at an outline of your document, it becomes much easier to kind of critically stand back and say, okay, I'm going to be brave here and get rid of these sections. If you're finding that really difficult to do, maybe ranking the points that you make. If you find that your chapter's got lots and lots and lots of material in it, thinking, okay, what are the most important here? And then looking at the ones at the bottom and again thinking, can I cut them or can I merge them? Like we've suggested here, it might even be within a chapter. It might be that you've got several paragraphs that are kind of that are repeating one another. So therefore just take the most important sentences and merge them into a single paragraph in that way. So it's all about stepping back. And that's why it's really helpful to do this, to give yourself some space after you've written. And that's why we often ask people to proofread our work, isn't it? And Alberto will talk about proofreading a little bit later. But it's that distance. You're not feeling too emotionally tied to the material that you're dealing with. Like we said, make sure that things are sticking to the point, that you're focusing on your question and making sure that your argument is really, really clear, that you're not going round and round in circles, that it's very clear. What is the purpose of every single sentence? Is this working hard for me? If it's not, if it's just padding, get rid of it. Even within a sentence, and again, this will differ massively from discipline to discipline. I know in some disciplines, having language in there, having jargon in there is really, really important. But wherever possible, trying to strip back those sentences to make them as clear as possible. So it's clear of your intent, the reader knows what you're trying to get across, but also so it's just kind of easy for them to read. What's the purpose of putting this thesis together? It's going to be marked. It's going to be read by someone. We don't want to confuse them and to obfuscate what we're trying to say. What we want to do is just make it really transparent, really easy to read so that they can engage with your material. In terms of repetition, if you find yourself using things like, as previously noted, as argued in chapter 3 as well, or anything that indicates that you've already been here, that you've already said this, those sorts of signposts, highlight them and then think, do I really need to say it again? Or is this just me adding padding? Introductions and conclusions, whether that's the kind of the whole chapters or whether that's introductions and conclusions to a chapter, are key areas where we tend to repeat ourselves. Now, the nature of them is that what we're going to do, of course, is tell the reader what we're going to say. Then the bulk of our chapter, we're going to say it. And then in the conclusion, we tell them what we've said. But those might be areas where you can just trim down ever so slightly because the bulk of the matter is going to be in the centre of your chapter. That's the kind of the meat of it. Do you really need to say it in quite such detail in the introduction and conclusion? And you might do. This isn't us saying definitely go to them and just hack away at it. But if you've got too many words, these are areas that are kind of low-hanging fruit. It's quite easy to take the material out there without damaging the flow of your argument in the middle of your chapter. Also, just think about, and it depends again on the nature of your thesis, but if you find that, I don't know, if it was a history PhD that you were doing, and you find that there are sort of themes, that there are individuals that you're bringing into the kind of narrative structure, but they only appear maybe once or twice, it might be that they're not central to your argument. It would be lovely to include them. But actually, again, if you've got to reduce that word count, that might be an instance, again, for removing that sort of material. So you could just do Control F in Word, just find out how often do I mention these people, these instances, these events? Is it a digression? Is it something that, I found out, like really, I really want to put it in, but I don't actually have the space to do it. So those are some of the kind of meta ways that we can reduce. Those are the kind of real taking the axe to your thesis and chopping out huge sections. But it might be that actually you feel you're pretty good. You've really tried to stick to your research question throughout. You've really tried to focus your writing, but still you're over the word limit. So there aren't large portions that you can just remove to drop that word count. But there are lots of kind of sentence shortening techniques which really drill down to your writing style. And again, we don't want to lose your voice. We don't want to lose that individuality. We definitely don't want it sounding like it's come out of ChatGPT. But what we do want to do is just, again, make sure it's really, really clear what we're trying to say. Now, the advice with this would be to kind of do it, when I say in one sweep, I don't necessarily mean sit down and do it in one go, but this isn't necessarily something you want to do kind of on and off. This might be something you set aside a few days, because if you go through the whole thesis or dissertation in this way, you're going to start to spot patterns. You're going to realize what your kind of stylistic flaws are that are leading to kind of too many words cropping up in your sentences. It'll just make it easier as you go through going, I know what to look for now. So the recommendation is to do this in one go. And I've taken quite a lot of tips from this book we have in the library, Revised by Pamela Haag. And this is actually about revising a book manuscript. But obviously lots of it is applicable to your thesis as well. And we've got lots of other books in the library that will give you tips and tricks in this way. So lots of them are quite similar. I'm going to go through them as in sort of one go. But to begin with, I'm going to give a little exercise that will give you a chance to play, and then we'll go through and kind of spot what some of those things are. So Hug does a lot of this kind of streamlining. And again, it's all about kind of clarity of argument, ultimately. So there's this example here, a 40-word sentence and a 21-word sentence. We've halved the number of words in the sentence. It's not that one is better or worse. There might be a little bit more detail in one. And sometimes, like we said, you will need that detail. You will need to go into detail to explore and to really drill down what it is that you mean. But are there also ways that you can streamline what you're saying? So if you're able to just sort of roughly scan that, you can just see how the meaning is retained without these extraneous words. And I'll just mark them there for you as well. Words that aren't really adding value to the sentence, given the reality. We don't need to say that. That's kind of clear. Marked by the assertion of. Again, is that really adding? In this case, it's a stylistic thing. Having an adverb like completely. They were completely flummoxed. They were flummoxed. We don't, we probably don't need those words in there. And if you find that those are little habits that you pick up, that you tend to stick in adverbs, you can actually pull quite a few words out of the writing that you're doing. So here's one. I'll just give you like a minute to look at this one. It's 56 words. See if you can chop out some sections. You might need to rearrange them. There might be terms in there that you feel you could merge. Yeah, I'll just give you 1 minute to see if you can have a go. You can think about it or write it down. Okay, so I'm sure lots of you haven't even had the chance to kind of properly engage with the text there. But just to show how it could have been revised, this might be similar to what you jotted down or not, but essentially kind of halving it again, just by jumping straight to the point rather than throughout the Cold War era. We don't need the word era there. We know it's a kind of defined period in history. We've got that repetition, tight and cramped quarters. Maybe just one of those words will indicate what we're trying to get at. We've still got repetition here, enclosed and cramped still comes through, consisting entirely of men. We've got that, like a submarine rather than, we've just rearranged the sentence ever so slightly to get to the point more quickly. But I still think the essence of what we're trying to say is there. So again, it won't work for every single discipline. It won't work for you every single time. But if you find that something's just a little bit heavy, a little bit too wordy, it's feeling a bit dense like a fruitcake, is there a way that we can just kind of strip it right back to the essence? So just picking up on some of those features that were there, some of these kind of extraneous words that we might find that we have. So like we said before, it might be bigger sections. There might be a biographical sketch that actually we don't really need. It's nice to have that. You've bothered to go to the effort of researching it, but you just don't really need to insert that sketch or that context. As we said, that idea of, as an aside or tangentially, well, if it's tangential to your argument, that's a clue, that's signposting straight away. You've done it for yourself. You don't need that there. Lots of adverbs that we often stick in as fillers, words we feel they're adding emphasis, but probably we don't actually need them. Anything that sort of modifies the degree at which we're talking about something, often you'll find that's several words, to all intents and purposes. That's, 5 words that you probably don't need. And redundant pairs, first and foremost, each and every, can we just put one of those words in? So that it's, like we said, it's tricky because it's stylistic and these might be things that you find come up a lot. So it's quite a lot of hard work to go and pull them out, but it's things to spot for, particularly if you find yourself rewriting sections and you think, oh, I've only got a couple of hundred words to get this in, just making sure that there's a lot of clarity there. Excessive detail, we tend to do is, tautologies quite a lot to completely finish something, an unexpected surprise. Well, clearly it's an unexpected, it's a surprise, naturally it is unexpected. Each individual in the room, we all do this. And there's an example there, of a sentence that you can be written, can be, again, kind of halved in length in those sub-bullet points there. Any other sort of modifiers of degree? Lists as well, multiple adjectives if we don't need it, the decrepit, decaying, crumbling tower block. Can we just use one of those words? We might get a little bit poetic and narrative, and that might be your style and that might be really important to your thesis. So this is no way a criticism if that's your style, but just thinking about, again, if you do that a lot, it adds up. basically. And sort of prepositional phrases, do we need to describe something in quite such detail? Can we just get straight to the point? Lots of vague phrases can be replaced by single words, again, quite stylistic things. And something really to look out for is the passive voice. That does add a lot of words. Now, if that's your tone and that's important, that's fine. But if you're chopping and changing between passive and active, you can see straight away kind of what the difference is there. If we're using a passive voice, it almost always involves more words. We're sort of talking around the subject. Whereas if you can use an active voice, you get straight to the point straight away. You're dealing with the subject of your sentence. And it goes for negative words as well. Like if we talk about something in a negative tone, naturally, we're sticking at least one more word in, which, not or whatever. So here's an example here. You're sort of talking backwards around the point. If you do not have more than 5 years experience, do not call for an interview. If you have not already emailed human resources, we can switch that round and make it a kind of positive thing. If you've got more than 5 years of experience, do this. So it's just something to be wary of. In your writing style. Okay, so that's lots and lots of different examples there. Some of them will apply to some of you. Some of you will hopefully be sitting back smugly thinking, nope, I'm very good. I can write really clearly and to the point. But even then, if you've still got too many words, it's going to have to be those kind of meta ways of writing and thinking of taking out large chunks of your work. So we haven't got ages to do this, so I don't expect you to be able to radically reduce a word count. But if you've got a piece of writing that you're working on, or you could perhaps take something that you're reading at the moment, a journal article or a chapter from a book, take a section. If it's your own work, might I suggest that you copy it and put it in a separate Word document so that you don't fiddle with your actual thesis and something goes wrong and you lose kind of hard crafted words. Pop it in a separate document and see if there's anything you can cut out there. See if there are stylistic things that you can change. If you feel that you do write in quite a clear, stripped down way, then perhaps try something like that reverse outlining that we talked about earlier on a slightly larger section and just jotting down, what are the key points? Am I sticking to the question at all times? So we'll only probably have, sort of 5 minutes to do this. So it's going to be quite a short exercise, but it just gets you into thinking about that. And if anyone wants me to repeat any of the examples I've already given, then just shout. So while you're carrying on with that, questions just come in. Can we give any guidance on when it's appropriate to introduce abbreviations, e.g. for a particular location or piece of legislation? And I would have thought it's pretty much always appropriate to bring that in if it's a kind of recognised abbreviation. I would have thought that is going to help reduce your word count. So, for example, United Nations, could you abbreviate that to UN? I think that's kind of pretty widely accepted. And I suppose just look to other things that you've read for clues about that. So look to other journal articles or books that might use that sort of terminology. So Bosnia and Herzegovina, is often abbreviated to BIH, and that would be totally appropriate because it's used in lots of the literature as well. So yeah, that would definitely be one way that you could reduce things down if you feel that there's terms or organisations that are coming up again and again, particularly if they're very long ones, and you've got 5 or 6 words every single time you're bringing it into your document. Oh yeah, Alberto?
Another practice might be to spell it out the first time, and then right after the word put in parentheses, and that way it signals to your reader that you'll be using that abbreviation every time that you're referring to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I meant. Sorry. Yes, it should always go in full the first time you use it. Definitely. Yeah, make that clear. And then maybe even if you find you're doing it a lot, if you've got a lot of organizations that you're referring to, as well as doing that once in the text, perhaps just have a list of abbreviations at the start of the document as well, so that if a reader has missed that initial introduction in chapter 1, and they're back in chapter 8 and suddenly thinking, actually, I've forgotten what this one is, they can quickly go to a kind of list of abbreviations just to kind of keep up to date on it. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. Okay, so I know that 5 or 6 minutes isn't very long to do this. This would be definitely several days worth of work. But does anyone want to share? Did they, just in a little passage, did they spot any ways that they're using kind of excessive words or detail? Did anyone try a little bit of reverse planning? You can unmute yourself or just type it up, whatever's easiest. Oh, hi Lynette, how are you?
Hi. Well, I definitely caught myself in the passive voice quite a bit. And I don't know where that comes from, but I tend to first write from passive voice and then realizing what it does to the narrative when you go into active. But I also caught this part where I was like intersect, intertwine, and interact. And I was like, oh, but then trying to figure out which word captures all of that. So then I'd use one word as opposed to 3. So it was mostly identifying them, which is helpful because now I feel like I'm seeing them more.
Okay, oh, that's useful. And there might be times when it is appropriate to use all 3 words. Then there's the nuance is so, well, they are so nuanced that actually, yeah, you just don't feel you can just stick one word in that will do everything for you. But yeah, if you find it's like a pattern that you're getting into, there might be occasions when you can kind of reduce that sort of listing, definitely. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else would like to share?
I did the removing the negative thing on a couple of paragraphs. I found that quite useful because then I realized when I was then sort of summarizing at the end of the paragraph, it made it shorter because I didn't have to repeat myself.
Okay,
so it just,
that's great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's good to hear. Yeah, and that's it. It can just be these little things here and there that just tidy. And even if it's not about the word count, hopefully a lot of what I've suggested this morning is just about making it easier to read. So yeah, even if you feel that you're within your word count, it's just worth trying to spot some of these things. Okay. Occasionally, we might need to increase our word count. This is definitely rarer. Well, certainly the people who come to us, this is rarer. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the obvious stuff, but just thinking about where you can go into more detail. So it's the kind of opposite of what we've just said. Sometimes you might need to strip out that kind of historical context or, you might be giving too many examples. In this case, it might be the other way around. Is there another way that you could put across your argument? If you've collected all that data, is there a way that you could repackage it and pull it out into 2 different ways of explaining the same point? Coming at your thesis statement from a number of different angles. Maybe you've kind of kept quite a narrow focus. If you need to put more words in, can you bring in alternative points of view or different thematic ways of approaching something. You know, if you've done a kind of social analysis, could you bring in a kind of political or economic analysis, for example? Yeah, different points of view. So maybe you do just need to do a bit more reading just to bring in kind of other examples, other case studies. If there is a paragraph that just feels like it's not really getting to the point, it's just a bit thin, it might be that you just never quite got around to fully developing it. It might have been something from that initial plan that you really wanted to include, but you never quite put the kind of content into it. Are there more sources that you can include? You know, are there more anecdotes or something like that, that, again, if you've written too much, that might be the sort of thing you would take out. In this case, it might be something to put in. And then just expanding quotes rather than doing a kind of 2-word quote from somebody. Could you put a more bulky one in, not to up the word count, but then it allows you to kind of go into a deeper analysis of that and to really get to grips with it and pull it apart and look at the kind of language that's being used, rather than just a couple of throwaway words that you just kind of blend into the flow of your own argument. So there are ways to do that as well if you need to, but that, as we said, that is definitely rarer. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Alberto. Do you want me to do the moving the slides forward, or do you want me to come out of share, Alberto? What's easiest?
Let me see if I can take over in the Teams.
Sounds risky.
And how's that? Yeah. Okay, we're back at the beginning. Great. All right. So first time experiment on Teams after a while, so it's always good sign. Okay, so we've been talking about basically revising, and now we want to move over to proofreading. And often what's quite nice is, I mean, one of the common tendencies when we talk about proofreading is that we kind of use it synonymously with editing. And these are two different things. And actually thinking about editing, it's very similar to, it's pretty much the same thing as what Laura's been talking about in terms of revising. Editing is concerned with global issues in writing. So the strength of your argument, the overall structure of your writing, clarity and style, whereas proofreading is a bit more concerned with the surface level issues, such as spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So one way I like to think about it, and I think just taking some of the language that Laura's been using about, you know, you take whole axes to sections and you turn them around and you're making these structural changes, is to think about it like if you're kind of basically reworking an apartment. So editing would be, for example, like breaking down the walls, opening up spaces. Maybe you want an open living room space, or a different type of way of doing the kitchen, or you want to create a study, so you put up another wall. So that's what editing/revising is about. Whereas proofreading is like thinking about the color scheme of the walls. Is this a bit warm or cool? How does the light kind of match with stuff like that? So it's these very surface level type of things. So what we've been talking about, I think, and if you've been following along with our workshops, are basically, the question comes, isn't it about content? So thinking about our workshops, we've been talking about note making, finding resources, and literature searching, time management, academic writing, even now revising. And it's easy to think, isn't it just about the content? And while the content is really important and your ideas are really important, proofreading also is a nice, important final step as you get to the end. And that's because it demonstrates a care of your own work and also respect for your reader. So if your reader's having difficulty working out these wonderful ideas that I'm sure you're writing and these arguments, then basically you're kind of putting another barrier for your reader to understand that. So the question then becomes, well, great, that's why we have spell checkers and Word and things like that. But spell checkers might not always work because what they do is basically they have basically problems distinguishing between words. So there versus there, or mature versus manure, your versus your. And so they kind of look at a stream of the words in a row, and they try to make sense of it, but they don't necessarily get the meaning of it. So I've given the sample here of basically don't rely on your spell checker. And if you look at this, all these words are spelled correctly. If you pop them into a spell checker, they won't basically come up. So actually, I'll show you with share my screen here. So I have a spelling checker. It came with my PC. It plainly marks for my review mistakes I cannot see. I strike a key and type a word and wait for it to say whether I am wrong or right. It shows me straight away. As soon as a mistake is made, it knows before too long I can put the error right. It's rarely ever wrong. I've run this poem through it. I'm sure you're pleased to know it's letter perfect all the way. My checker told me so. So all the words spelled correctly. And I think that's what I've been trying to kind of say, is that basically a spell checker will look for words, but it doesn't get the meaning, semantic sense of it. And clearly it's missed all these things that you would want to get to catch. So let me go back to my presenting. So prior to proofreading then, what do we want to do? I guess the best advice is don't edit and proofread at the same time. If you're making these structural changes and basically you want to get those done first, rather than proofread certain sections and then go back and think, oh, actually, I need to revise, I need to change the structure, because then you'll have to proofread again. So keep the activities separate there. And first, and also one thing is you want to give yourself some distance from the text. And the reason we want to give ourselves some cognitive distance is basically we want to erode the mental image that we have in our mind about our own work. So you've been spending lots of time with your work. You probably can say the ideas backwards and forwards and sideways and all these type of things. And that's really great because you have a familiarity with your work. But at the same time, it also allows you to autocorrect mistakes that you've made. And how many times have you, for example, as you're reading, you are automatically correcting mistakes, and then you hand it in somebody's like, yeah, you have a couple of misspellings here. How did I see that? Well, you haven't given yourself this type of cognitive distance that you need to see your work with new eyes. So another piece of advice that we can give before you start proofreading is think about proofreading from printed documents. Some benefits is that it increases reading comprehension and efficiency. There's some studies that show that if you read from a hard paper copy, this can increase these type of capacities of comprehension and efficiency. Also, it's another way to interact with your work on a tactile level. So you're engaging multiple intelligences here. And with that in mind, also you want to also make sure that basically you give yourself some space to write on your work as well. So tip number one then is basically read your text out loud. And this is simply because it's a different way to interact with your work. You've been writing it, often, perhaps sometimes in silence. So reading your work out loud allows you to process the information in a different way to see how it's sounding. Read at a moderate pace. So this isn't like when you were called in the classroom when you were in grade school and say, okay, can you read the text? And then you try to get through it as fast as you can because you're a bit shy. No, read at a moderate pace. Pronounce every word, every number. And this is a way, again, allowing you to basically automatically correct your work. You can also use your finger to follow along. That way you avoid skipping words. And this is kind of another way to kind of regulate your pace with that. So tip number two kind of falls along the same similar line. Basically, you can use a ruler, to read line by line of your text. And this will help you basically to avoid skipping ahead, basically to the next line. So avoid that tendency of trying to read through it quickly. That allows you to engage with each line on a line by line basis. If you don't have a ruler, I'm a bit old school, so you might not have, use a folded piece of paper. It works just as well, and it can also basically keep you blind to a couple of other lines. So yeah, it will keep you on a line-to-line basis. Tip number three is basically circle every punctuation, and that's another way to kind of break your text into smaller sections. Basically, circle the punctuation marks, every punctuation mark on the paper. It forces you to slow down as you read your work. You can use different colors for different types of punctuations. So basically full stops, commas, quotation marks. And that just helps you to draw your attention across the text to the different types of punctuations that are there. And you can ask yourself, is this punctuation correct? If you're a bit short on time, you might circle the punctuations that you usually have trouble. So I have trouble with commas. I love commas. It's the way I think in the positives and pauses and things like that. So if I were doing it, I would always circle the commas. So if you've been getting feedback, basically that you have trouble with a certain type of punctuation, yeah, that's a good way to kind of identify them really quickly. So we've been talking about then these tips as they relate to hard copies, but if you like to work with electronic copies as well, there are some ways to kind of approach proofreading there. So Word has a wonderful text-to-speech function for screen reading, and that's really quite nice because you can control the speed of your reading. It allows you to kind of just put it on play and hear the words as they're coming back, and you might, again, works on functioning and how do you process the information in a different way. You can control the start point. So if you just really want to focus in on a particular section of your work, you can highlight it and press play. At the end point, you can control the speed of the voice, the different sounds of the voice as well. So that's really another a nice way to kind of interact with your text. Tip number 5 is to manipulate your text. And again, this works on eroding the mental map that you have you're writing. So you might take a couple of sections, increase the font size, or isolate a text, copy and paste it, as Laura said, on another document as you're revising, and it allows you to see it in isolation. That way you're not influenced by the other sections that might appear on the page. You can press enter after each sentence. That way it helps you to look at each sentence a little bit more slowly. And as I said, it's just all these different techniques of eroding that mental map that you have of your writing and giving you some cognitive space to deal with it on a different level. So I've got some practice, and I think I sent it out in the email with the joining link. So if you open that up at this moment, I'd like us to take about 5 minutes. So I've given you a selection, and I'll just actually stop sharing, and I'll bring it up on the page here. And this is the proofreading practice here. And so you take about maybe 5 minutes, and I want you to kind of engage with it in a way, see how many proofreading errors you can find. And then after about 5 minutes, we will come back and have a look to see at what we can find. All right. So about 5 minutes now. Oh, actually, I shouldn't have been showing you the Word document, should I? Never mind. I will show you that one.
Lynette, you got a question?
No, I had a moment. I wasn't sure if I was mute. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Good to see you sort of gesturing.
Alrighty, so we've come to about the end of the 5 minutes. So how do we do? Can't see anybody at the moment because I'm sharing my screen, but everything okay? So I will do the reveal then. A bit of the answer key. As you can see, Word picks up quite a bit of it already. But interesting to see it doesn't catch the double period here as well. Got a period there and there. Didn't catch the period in the middle of the sentence. And actually to capitalize if it did, there was a period. But other things it's pretty much caught. Yeah. So some concluding thoughts as you kind of think about proofreading. You want to read in short blocks of time, and this will be because it helps to refresh your focus. If you find yourself as you're proofreading getting a little bit tired, do take a couple of breaks. And that's, I think, the important thing is, as if you start this process, give yourself work in some time for proofreading at the end before your submission. That way you can have enough time. Read for 1 error at a time. And that will, again, it works on keeping you focused. If you're trying to work for punctuation or misspellings and things like that, it's easy to kind of start mixing things, and that's where mistakes can get made. If you're a bit short on time, as I said, prioritize which error you want to read for. And last but not least, you can enlist the help of a friend, maybe somebody that's working with you. We do also offer a proofreading service for end of the research projects. Give us a little bit of time, but these tips will also help you just in case you just don't have time to get it in at least 2.5 weeks, or maybe you want to submit a draft for your supervisor. You can really use these type of things to help polish your work. Okay, so that's enough, I think, from me on proofreading, and I'll hand it back over to Laura now.
Great, thanks, Alberto. Yeah, so, oh, sorry, Anna, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry, can you hear me well? Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have like another question about the proofreading, because I know that like normal spell checkers don't work, but there's so many things out there like, you know, like Grammarly or like Quillbot. I wonder what's your assessment of them and whether they're actually helpful.
That's, I guess, for me, yeah. Yeah, so I think Grammarly is a good system, but I think, especially with the way that AI has been integrated into it, you have to look at the university policy, because Grammarly, I think there's some features of it, because it has AI worked into it, it might actually rewrite some of the sections for you. And that can walk a really fine line between basically using it for a summative assessment versus just strictly, if you, I guess, narrow it down to just use it like a spell checker there. So I might just talk with your supervisor about that, or check the departmental policy, because our proofreaders, they follow the proofreading guidelines set by the university, so they won't talk about the content, but they'll draw attention to basically these type of surface error level errors, or also formatting, that so they don't change actually the structure of the way sentences are moved. So that would be my advice. You could use Grammarly, but if you're using it with the AI function embedded in it, be careful. Yeah. That was a really good question. I was kind of expecting that might come up. Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, anything else? But yeah, no, I think it's a really good point about just AI generally, actually, in terms of the kind of finishing off process. You know, if you're finding that you're having difficulty with a section, you know, it's probably quite tempting to put it into a generator and, you know, seeing what comes out. But then you've really got to think about, actually, has this changed the meaning? Has this changed the style? And of course, I think stylistically, that's my biggest concern, is that things will begin to shout out. It's, you know, if it's reading in one particular way and then suddenly there's this disjuncture and it feels like you've kind of disrupted the writing style, and then it carries on, it's going to be pretty evident in a really long document like that. So yeah, I think wherever possible, just kind of sticking to it yourself, or kind of using human input, which is a shame, because, you know, there's a lot of functions of these spell checkers that were really good, and I think they're now getting a little bit too clever for their own good, and it's becoming a bit problematic. Okay, so that comes to the end of the sort of the large parts of just kind of thinking about your whole thesis, about how you can kind of rework it. What we're going to do now is, drill down on these kind of specific tools that are ways of formatting, whether it's the bibliography that we're talking about, or whether it's actually just the kind of contents and page numbers and those sorts of things. So if you feel that you're comfortable in those areas, that's absolutely fine, and understand if you need to drop off the call. We'll carry on recording and we'll share this anyway if you do want to dip back in for any tips. But I will, rather than actually just share the screen, I'm just going to, sorry, go back to the slides. I'm just going to share my screen. Just look at some of the formatting options that we have. So I'm not an expert in this, and every time I demonstrate it, it seems that something's moved around in Word. So apologies if it takes a little bit longer for me to spot some things. But the main things that we want to point out is that these tools exist for signposting again to your reader when there's been a change in a section. They make it easier for your reader to navigate around your thesis. So obviously having a content is really helpful, so they can jump to particular pages if they need to. It also, there are a number of ways that it can help improve your working experience of your document, particularly, as we said, if you need to jump to sections or if you need to rework sections. It might be that, and this seems to be the way a lot of people work, is that they keep different chapters in different documents. But ultimately, when you come together, it's often easier to have everything in one big document at the end, and that's when it becomes really unwieldy. So just looking at how you might be able to add some of those signposting features. A lot of it hangs off the use of styles. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with these, but this indicates to Word, what the role of a particular piece of text is within your document. So generally things might be, normal, and that's just kind of body text. Lots of you, I'm sure, are familiar with adding in headings throughout. Now, one of the problems I have with these is I don't know why they're in blue. I don't like the fact they're in blue. Maybe it's to make them jump out, but for me, I always want them in black. So as you can see here, I've created my own styles that are in the size I want, the size font, they're the level of bold that I want, they're the color that I want them to be. And it's okay to use the preset ones, that's not a problem at all. But if I want to, I can edit something. So I can create a style. So I could select a bit of text. I can just do that here. Create a style and then modify it. So you can see what it's based on. It could be based on normal text, but actually for me, I want this to be a heading. So it's based on the heading, and then that tells Word that this is my top level of heading. And that's really important when I come to create a table of contents. So I need it to know what to pull out in what hierarchy. So it's based on heading 1, but I might want it to be size 14. I might want it to be in italics. I might want it to be a completely different font. And you can fiddle around with the color as well. I might want it to be dark green. You can do whatever you want with it in that way. And so that is what this new heading 1 is going to look like. And then if I give something else that, then, oh no, hang on, it's dropped off there. Where have I put it there? It's called style 1. I can then also rename it. So as you see, I've renamed these LJ or Laura's heading style or title in that way. But that's one of the questions we get a lot is, I want to use headings, but I don't like the way they look. So you can fiddle around with them and make them look however you want. So that's my heading. I can then go in and create subheadings. So heading 2, again, I could edit that in whatever way I want to. And as we said, this is only important, not only so that they look a bit different and indicate to your reader that they're moving into another area, but so that when we come to create our table of contents, then Word knows what it's looking for. So in that way, if we go to the References tab, I'm sure lots of you have discovered this before, and you can stick that in. So it's just pulling the data. So it's like a tiny bit of coding sitting inside your document. It has numbered the pages for itself, even though I haven't got the page numbers there. So as a bare minimum, that's something that's really handy and really convenient. And then if I delete a section as well, so if I decide actually I don't want this section on table of contents, I can just delete it, and then it will be deleted out of my table of contents. All I would need to do is click on Update Table. So just make sure you do that as you go through. If as we said, if you come in with your axe and take out whole sections, just update the table of contents to reflect what you've currently got in your document. Something else people often want to do is create a table of figures. And again, that's done through this References heading up here. So we can insert a caption for every image that we have. It could be a figure or a table. I'm going to call it figure 1, like that. Again, there's some editing there. I can fiddle around with it a little bit. It pops in there. We can give this one another caption. And then when we go back to our the front of our particular document, we can insert our table of figures. This is editable, and I can change it there. And it's the same with the table of contents, custom table of contents. You can decide how many layers of hierarchy. You might be that you end up with many, many, many subheadings, and that's just too much for your table of contents. You can strip it back to maybe just the top few headings, so that it's neater and easier for your reader to navigate your document. So that's one really important part of it. Another important part of editing your document is breaking things up. You know, often we don't want just a single flow of text all the way through. We want to be able to insert some page breaks. And it's really important to insert section breaks if we're going to have multiple forms of numbering in our document. So that's probably before you've inserted page breaks from the insert menu. If it's actually a section break, just remember to go to the layout section of the menu there, and we can insert these breaks here like that. And this also helps, like I said, if you want to put page numbers in. So in terms of putting in our page numbers, we might start here, insert page number, decide where you want them. I like them at the bottom on the right-hand side, but they can go wherever you want. And then we might want to think about how they appear in the document. So I would probably not want one on my title page. So I'm going to give myself a different first page, and then I can change this and oh, hang on, Word's not responding. Just let it think that through. Alberto was having trouble with his Office earlier, and now it's not working. I'm gonna... Okay, it's completely jammed, which is why I have one that I prepared earlier. Is that no? Sorry about this. Whole thing's jammed up. Okay, well, given that this is a little bit of a kind of show, a bit of a demonstration, that makes it quite difficult if I can't do anything on here. Don't know why. Sorry.
Looks like it's still thinking about it.
Yeah. Tell you what, I'm just going to stop sharing in case that's causing part of the problem. See if I can now close the document. Nope. Or task manager's going to have to come in here, I think, and shut down Word. Just talk amongst yourselves for a bit.
Like while we're waiting, I will say that basically, yeah, being able to set your own style in these type of documents does help a lot, because I would waste a lot of time copying basically the style guides, having to rechange it and all that stuff like that. And that helped me, I think, shave a lot of time off of writing my own dissertation when I was doing it last year. So yeah, definitely recommend make your own style.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and that can be quite fun to fiddle around with. And I think actually this is looking much better. This has got the styles in. I don't know what was going on with that word before, but these are the ones that I've created before. So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. There's my title. You can see they're different size fonts, which just helps me kind of see where I'm coming from. Okay, I've brought up the formatted one just in case it all jams again. But in terms of, yeah, fiddling around with page numbers, like I said, it's important to have a different first page. You probably don't want a page number on your title page. And it's also important to this link to previous. This is really important for linking and unlinking sections. So as you said, we've chunked stuff up. You might want numbers to flow between sections. So it might be between chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You want your numbers to flow, but probably between your front matter, which is things like your table of contents, your acknowledgements, list of figures, list of abbreviations, which we talked about earlier. We don't want our page numbers to be linked. So that is how we disassociate those different sections, linked previous. And you can see here that I've got Roman numerals in my front matter. But then by the time I get down here to the actual content, I've got a separate sequence of running numbers there. So yeah, have a think about with page numbers. You can format your page numbers. As we said, you can change between A, B, C, D. Perhaps if you've got appendices as well, you might want a different run sequence of running numbers, and that would be important again then to unlink the sections from your very last chapter, your conclusion, and any appendices that you have. And you can change the numbering system that you have there. You can also indicate what you want it to start at. So if you do decide to keep different documents for chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, remember to tell it which page number to start at, and obviously do that as your very last thing in case you delete something in chapter 1. You don't want chapter 2 starting, you know, out of sequence with your other page numbers, but that's a useful function to have there. Okay, something else that I find useful, as I said, just in terms of dealing with a really large document in Word, are the different views. So the navigation pane is really helpful for me when I have a long document. And again, this is why it's so important to use those styles at the very beginning. If you tell something that it's a header, if you tell it that it's a subheading, it's going to be able to, you can then condense these sections. So you can see very quickly, you could just have your top level chapter headings and you could jump to those straight away, or you can collapse things out and you can see quite quickly, okay, I'm going to jump to that section there. So when you've got lots and lots of subheadings, that's a really nice way to get an overview of your document rather than scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, or using Control F to try and guess, you know, where your next chapter is going to start. So that works a little bit like a table of contents, just running on the side there. Something else is also the outline menu. I find that quite helpful. And that also helps you do this compression of sections. So using toggling between these plus and minus, we can then expand out a section. So if I just really wanted to focus on the text, and I think, again, this goes back what Alberto said as well, you know, when you're looking at your text differently, you kind of read it differently. It takes away that kind of traditional layout. It's moving the text around. But if I just wanted to focus in on a particular area, I could collapse everything else, keep those headings so I can see where it fits in the wider context, but I'm then perhaps not having to kind of copy and paste and chuck it into another document. So I quite like that outline function, just to be able, and you can see it strips the images out as well. So it's almost putting it in like a plain text for you to read through. Okay. And again, just to show you can do that collapsing here within our document, because again, we've given them those headings. It knows how to play around and manipulate that text. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We'll just perhaps take 5 minutes if you're not familiar with fiddling around maybe with the different views or some of the numbering systems, or maybe having a go at making your own style headings if you haven't done that before. You can do that, as I said, perhaps on a copy of your own document or on the document that is on the LibGuide. And I'm just going to put in the link to that. Now we've got little videos of all the things I was sort of half demonstrating to you there with Word not working properly for you. But on that page there, I have to apologise, the formatting broke yesterday. This was organised quite neatly in 2 columns, and for some reason it's put everything into an enormously long column. But there are the little sort of screencast videos if you're not familiar with how to do it yourself. And if you scroll to the nearly to the bottom, there's a section called Have a Go. And it just says this is a short document to allow you to experiment with the following. And that's the document that I was just playing around with there. So if you want something that's really safe, it's not your own, you might want to have a go with that. Yeah, we'll just take 1 or 2 minutes for you to have a play and ask if you've got any questions.
Ask a question about whether once you get into like, you know, a massive document with images and everything, is it better to have chapters and sections in separate documents and put them together at the end so it's not so unwieldy in terms of like your processor power and everything? And then will Word pick up on that if you paste everything into one thing, or have you got to go back through and try and make all the contents match up and everything?
Yeah, so that can be a problem when you merge the documents. I think there's a way to do that, and I think, let me just revisit. So what I suggested is that, yeah, if you've been working in separate documents, on the ribbon menu under Insert, under the text group, select Object Text from File, and then it will actually merge the files into a formatted document. So that might be something worth playing around with, rather than kind of just literally highlighting and copying and pasting. You can actually merge the files. Yeah, you do run the risk of the formatting not working, and it might be ultimately, you know, you'll kind of want to keep them separate. As you say, I think for processing, if you've got a really image heavy document, it is definitely worth keeping them separate, and just so you can kind of keep on top of it and you're not scrolling through page after page. But yeah, I mean, again, wherever possible, keeping multiple copies of everything so that you don't lose something. I don't know if anyone else has got experience of kind of merging files, but that's the only way I know to do it. So is, yeah, actually through the Insert menu rather than just copying and pasting.
Got another question? Yes.
Thanks both for that. That was really helpful. It was just a couple of kind of suggestions that I've come across in the past that might be also useful. So you mentioned about the section break. So one of the other things you can do with that is have certain pages within the document landscape. So particularly if you've kind of got large flow charts or kind of clinical diagrams and things like that, that can be quite useful in terms of having a single document but having a combination of portrait and landscape. And also one of the things that sometimes catches me off guard is having kind of breaks that I've introduced that I didn't intend to introduce. So trying to backtrack and actually delete some of those breaks. But actually, I think it's if you go to the paragraph icon on the home screen, isn't it? And you can see all the kind of little P shapes and then delete the breaks. That's quite useful as well, just in case sometimes you kind of go overboard with introducing too many breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's that kind of the behind the scenes stuff, isn't it, in Word, that is sometimes useful to have. Yeah, something we had an issue recently, a PhD student approached us about that thing where you have portrait and then landscape, then portrait. And that seemed to mess around really horribly with bibliographic referencing. So they were using Zotero and it completely messed it up. So if anyone's got experience of using it in that way, we'd be really keen to learn. We managed to kind of get it to work sometimes by going in and telling it to start from a particular point, but a lot of the time it was leaping like 100 numbers in terms of the footnote citations that this person was using. So yes, I'd be interested to learn more. And we spent hours on forums, you know, about Zotero trying to work it out. So not to say don't use it, but just to be aware that that's something that can happen and that there might be other ways that you need to almost start again in another document to get the numbering to work. I'm not sure what was going on behind the scenes in Word there, but it wasn't very pretty. But yeah, thanks for that tip, yeah, about switching. Anna.
Okay, so is it possible to somehow link the headings with the paragraphs underneath them? So for instance, there's never a situation when, you know, like a heading is on one page and the paragraph begins on another page.
Not that I'm aware of. So I think that would be where having a page break would be helpful so that the content is always kept together. So on the section break, if you find that, yes, for some reason, just the way that the spacing has worked out, you've got a heading and then the text below, I would probably put a page break at the start of that heading to make sure it always started on a new page. And that way, if you're kind of fiddling with the text above and you're never quite sure whether that heading is going to jump up or fit below the natural break in a page, sticking a page break in is probably the best way to do that. That's my understanding, rather than trying to link the paragraph text with the heading itself. Does that make sense? Okay, so we've just got about 15 minutes left. Alberto, do you want to do a quick demo of Zotero? Again, for some people, you might already have your referencing sorted, in which case feel free to leave. But yeah, this is just an opportunity to show you how, even if you haven't been using it all the way through creating a document, it might still be worth your time using reference management software, because quite often that just eats up lots of time when you could be focusing on the content.
Yes, definitely. And I think especially if you have your own internal referencing already done, you're more than halfway through the document, it might not make sense to kind of go back and then try to put everything into Zotero and then try to recite it in the document. But one thing from personal experience is it can be really helpful for putting that end bibliography really, really quickly. So what I will do is I'll share my screen here. And so Zotero looks like that. When you download it, you'll have your own space for your own library. This has every book that you put into it. Here you can draw it basically by creators, so you can organize it by that. By year, you see if you have anything attached to it right here in the attachments, so you can see the PDFs. The nice thing is you can break it down into folders. So if you're working for different chapters of your theses or different sections, you can organize all your basically references in there. You can see I have a practice basically folder here. When to download, if you go to, I'll use iDiscover. So I was a bit afraid that our technology is acting naughty, so I've already done some of these searches. You have a book here that I've searched for. If you download the browser adapter, you can see that it changes here. You can clip it. And usually what you'll want to do is you'll want to be positioned on the folder that you want it to go to. And you can clip it in there. It tells you basically where it's saving it to. If we look in there, it'll be right on there. Now, the nice thing is that it also works like a type of word processor. So you can basically adapt the resource. You can see what it's done because of I've taken it from our database is it's brought across all the information as it appears on the database. So the title, it has basically given you the full title. All you have to do is basically take that off there. You can do some easy fixes there. You can basically take off the contributor, or you can just delete him if you wanted to. Let's call this person the translator. You've got the information, series, place of publication, year. It's a few seconds when you do it like that, but the nice thing is that you then don't have to worry about it again. So you've got that. If you wanted to do a journal article, so I've done a search for Dracula. You open it from there. This is where it works a lot better if you go directly from the publisher site, because then if you clip it there, what it does is it takes all the information, and if there's a PDF available, it will also allow you to get on the PDF. So you can see here, I'm on it. It's a bit more it's accurate for the title, gives you the author, tells you the information, volume, issue, pages, when you accessed it. And so once you start building up a bit of a collection there, if I wanted then to make a very quick bibliography, I would say copy, create bibliography from these items. You see the range of styles that's available from Zotero. You can also put manage styles, and if you don't see the style that you're looking for, and it's got a database of different types of styles. I usually work with American APA 7. You can copy it to a clipboard, press OK. And then if you wanted to do a bibliography, it will create a bibliography really quite quickly in the style of the APA. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the magic is that you're able to do that very quite quickly. Whereas before, I used to spend almost as much time doing the bibliography and then actually sometimes some of the writing, and I would hate getting to the end simply because the thought of doing the whole bibliography with all the sources that I had around me would be tedious. Let's say you find a mistake. Let's say actually you you should be capitalizing each letter. You can go back into Zotero and say I want to capitalize Aleph here. Let's just do a small. Let me. No, sorry. That was for the side and right function. So Zotero does have a side and right function that if you press refresh, it will go about refreshing. So what I mean by that is you can add a citation. Again, it will ask you to start style. There. And it will go create the bibliography. And so if I wanted to change, again, the title, let's say that's not quite right, then I go back here, make it lower case again. Now we can go back and press refresh, and the A goes back to small. So that's if you're doing the side and right function from Zotero, which you can download it into your Word document. It's a lot more, there has a lot more capability if you start doing it from here, but realizing, as I said, if you're already more than halfway, it might not be worth going back and trying to redo all these in-text citations, but you do have the ability to do a bibliography really nice and quickly there. So I think for time, I will just stop sharing. We have a couple of videos on our LibGuide as well. And I'm very, very happy if you're more interested to go more in depth with Zotero to kind of explore some of the functions. If you're more interested with that, do one-to-one. Yes, we had another question, I think, or a chat. Main reasons for using Zotero over EndNote or Mendeley desktop. For me, I think Zotero, just because it's open source, so it's free. So EndNote, while I think it's great and it's powerful, once you leave the University of Cambridge, you have to figure out how you're going to deal with all the references there. And that might be a bit of a problem you don't want to have to deal with at the very end, and then importing them into another type of reference management system for paying. I think Zotero, for me, I think it was more intuitive than Mendeley. Although Mendeley has some great functions that you can be part of a community and it will send you updates depending on the preferences that you have. But I just thought Zotero is a bit more intuitive for me, and I like the features.
Yeah, I think also the variety of different item types you can have in Zotero is particularly good if you're in the humanities and social sciences. So if you want to keep records of interviews and audio files and images, blog posts, letters, emails, it generally is a little bit more flexible in those terms. But I mean, they both work equally well. You can have communities within Zotero as well. You can share bibliographies with your supervisor or with a research group. It's kind of a personal preference and probably what your peers are using. It might be worth sticking with that, but they're so similar. I think you can see a demonstration of one and pick up the other, but happy to support you with both if you want any more questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anna, you had...
Yeah, okay. Sorry for another question. I mean, I've been using Zotero for quite some time, and I'm a huge fan of it. It's super convenient. But whenever I work with a very large document, such as like my whole dissertation, it kind of messes up sometimes. Often it takes like ages to update, and sometimes it just like crashes entirely. And I'm wondering whether there are any, like best practices on how to avoid it.
I think, yeah, so do you refresh, so you update Zotero, the software, every update in there, things like that. Yeah, I know that sometimes it can be a bit strange with different types of, so I'm not sure if you're using Word or Google, but I know Google, basically, it doesn't like Google very much. And I think, as Laura said, yeah, I'm not sure what might be going on in the background that, yeah.
No, I'm using Word, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that eventually it works out, but it's just you know, my documents have like crashed like so many times
Oh
because of
gosh.
that.
Yeah, it might be worth looking. Have you looked on the forums for Zotero? Okay, and no. Gosh.
Yeah, so that might be another case for keeping things as separate as possible
Yeah.
until later on, and when you're kind of compiling it at the end. But just for kind of speed of working, yeah, a slightly smaller file size, particularly if you have a huge number of citations, might be beneficial, even if what you're doing is just sort of keeping a master document, pulling bits out and editing it, and then reinserting it back into the main document, but just for kind of agility. So yeah, sorry if that's the case. Because it's brilliant when it works well, isn't it? But yeah, occasionally these things don't.
And I do have another question, if that's all right. Well, basically, like nothing to do with what we've discussed today, but also something which might be relevant in the run-up to submitting the dissertation, because, well, recently there've been like a lot of, I don't know, like plagiarism scandals as well, and I'm kind of wondering, I mean, I don't like, of course, consciously plagiarize, but what if I did it by mistake? Is there a way to run your thesis when it's done through like a plagiarism software to notice that, you know, maybe some of the things might have been missed or something like that?
That might be just something to inquire with the department about. So obviously some departments do use plagiarism checkers for undergraduate essays and things like that, and they would just routinely put them all through. You could ask whether or not you could have access to it. As far as I'm aware, I don't know of any that are freely available. I think they guard them quite heavily, but certainly the reports that they churn out are useful. Obviously, you have to bear it in mind because there can be large sections that it says, you know, you've taken from somebody else that you've plagiarized, but actually when you read into it, you haven't, or it might be work that you've previously submitted, you know, if it's elsewhere within your document and then you're citing yourself. So you've just got to read the reports really carefully if they come out, but I'm sure they would give you guidance on how to do that. But certainly I've seen reports that come out where people have heavily plagiarized and they've just been stitching together chunks of text from other people. And so, yeah, it looks pretty good at that. It provides a list of references as to where it thinks it's got it from. So it is quite easy if it is flagging sections up, you can then, you know, retrace your steps as such and kind of work out why it's doing it in that way. And as long as you're sure that, you know, you haven't plagiarized, and it might just be that you've cited somebody, obviously it would count that as, you know, plagiarism. It doesn't necessarily read into whether it's a citation or not, but you can then make that kind of critical judgment on it. Yeah. Oh yeah, just that you've just added the other source types. Yeah, and I think it's really helpful that, you know, if you tag the source type correctly, then obviously when it comes to cite it, it's going to pull different metadata from the record. So yeah, it's really helpful to kind of, you know, if you're citing a video or a website or whatever, it'll add the date that you accessed it, which obviously it's not going to do that for a book or a journal article in the same way. So be as precise as you can. Yeah, as Alberto said, you know, that ability to kind of, if something's not looking right in your bibliography, backtracking and seeing how it's downloaded. Certainly there was one article you had there, Alberto, that was all coming out in capital letters, you know, sort of shouting at you. So that would be, you know, don't fiddle with that in the bibliography or the document itself. Go back to Zotero and edit it there. So yeah, if ever a reference comes through and it just looks weird or it hasn't got the right information, it might be that it's downloaded it as the wrong sort of file type and it's not pulling on the correct metadata, or that you've got to go in and just fiddle with it and do a bit of housekeeping. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I was just